Hello, so today we are going to go over cells and energy. So this is going over photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So this is Unit 2, Lesson 8. So the attendance link will also be in the description box below, and it will also be in the PDF file. Our objectives for today is to explain the main function of chloroplast, explain the role of mitochondria in converting and releasing stored energy in cells, and identifying mitochondria in an illustration of a cell, so be able to point it out on a picture. So which organelle provides energy to the cell in both plant and animal cells? Remember, that is the mitochondria. That's what they both have in common. So the process of cellular respiration takes place inside each of the mitochondria, and that is true for both plant and animal cells. So what is the name of the process that takes place inside the chloroplast of a plant cell? So remember, that is photosynthesis. So let's look into photosynthesis a little bit more here. So this is a method of converting sun energy into chemical energy, so it's usable by cells. You have the autotrophs, so those are the self-feeders, so those are the organisms capable of making their own food. So think about plants and algae and stuff like that. We can also subcategorize autotrophs into photoautotrophs, so those are the ones that are using the sun's energy, and then chemioautotrophs, so those are the ones that are using chemical energy to make their own food. So photosynthesis takes place in specialized structures inside the plant cells called chloroplast. So those are the light absorbing pigments molecules, so that's like the chlorophyll. So the pigment is the chlorophyll, the structure is the chloroplast. So the overall reaction for photosynthesis is you're going to have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water, and that's going to yield 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen. So the carbohydrate that's made here is glucose, and then water is split as a source of electrons from hydrogen atoms, releasing the O2 as a byproduct. So we're actually splitting the water here to get the electrons from the hydrogen, and then that's going to leave this oxygen to reconnect with itself, and that's how we're going to get oxygen as a byproduct. So electrons increase potential energy when moving from water to sugar, and therefore the energy is required. So where would the energy come from for this reaction? So because this is photosynthesis, we know that the energy must come from the sun. And where in the reaction would we place it? So where would we write that in here? So because it's taken in the carbon dioxide in the water first, you're actually going to have the light energy written actually right above the arrow here. So it's going to be like in the presence of is going to yield these. Alright, so we have ATP, which we've heard a little bit about before. So that's just a cellular energy nucleotide base molecule with 3 phosphate groups bound to it. When removing the 3rd phosphate group, lots of energy can be either stored there or released. So we have ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. So we've seen adenosine as part of the amino acids in DNA and RNA. And tri, so that's where we get the T from. So the tri meaning 3, and phosphate because there's the 3 phosphate groups. So if I remove one of the phosphate groups, the ATP then becomes ADP, so adenosine diphosphate, so that meaning 2. So tri is one that's holding all the energy, the di is the one that you have to put energy into so it can store it. Alright, so we have the photosystems here, so those are the light capturing units containing the chlorophyll. We also have the electron transport chain, or system, which is a sequence of electron carrier molecules that shuttle electrons, and those help release the energy to make ATP. So electrons and chlorophyll must be replaced so that the cycle may continue. Those electrons come from the water molecules, and oxygen is the byproduct from that. So here is just a drawing example of it. So we can look at each of the little chloroplasts here. We see that light enters and hits the chlorophyll. It takes in water, and one of the byproducts is ATP and oxygen. So here's just another way of looking at it. So water comes in, carbon dioxide comes in, sunlight comes in, we get glucose and oxygen as our products. So what is true about chloroplast? The function of chloroplasts are to convert light energy, so energy from the sunlight, into chemical energy. So it's taking those wavelengths of light and converting those into chemical energy, so that glucose, so that the plant and other animals can use it, mostly the plant. So we see how energy enters the food chain via the autotrophs. We can now look at how organisms use that energy as fuel in their bodies. So plants and animals both use products from photosynthesis, so the glucose, for metabolic fuel. So heterotrophs must take in energy from outside sources because we cannot make our own. When we take in glucose or other carbs and proteins and fats, these foods don't come to us in the way our cells need them to use. So the food that we eat has to be changed so our cells can actually use them. So that's when cellular respiration comes into play here. So this is the transformation of chemical energy into food, and that gets changed into chemical energy for the cells, so that gets changed to ATP. So ATP, remember, is just the adenosine triphosphate. That is just how the energy is being transported in our cells. So these reactions process the same way in plants and animals via the cellular respiration. So the overall reaction for cellular respiration might look a little similar than what we just looked at before. So you have glucose plus oxygen, remember we breathe in oxygen, and that's going to yield carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, and our byproduct of water. So take a second, think about this reaction, and think about the reaction for photosynthesis. So if we break down the glucose, it starts inside the cytoplasm. So you have like the lysosomes and stuff like that are starting to break this down. At this point, life diverges into two forms and into two different pathways. So we have our anaerobic cellular respiration, so that's like fermentation, so without oxygen, or we have our aerobic cellular respiration, so it's with oxygen. So we have glycolysis, which is just a series of reactions which takes that 6-carbon glucose and breaks it down to 2 3-carbon molecules, and we call that pyruvate. But basically we're just taking the glucose and we're breaking it down. So this is one of the most ancient ways that all organisms, from bacteria to humans, got their energy. This yields 2 molecules of ATP for every 1 molecule of glucose that's broke down. So not a really big return on it, but enough of a return that our body does it. So cellular respiration, all of the how it's made ATP and everything is made in this organelle. Arrow is pointing at the organelle. Which organelle is that? If you said the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria, you are correct. So this is just another picture here. So we have glycolysis, which takes that glucose, that 6 carbons, and breaks it down to the 2 3-carbon pyruvate molecules. So we get some ATP here, but now this is going to go into our mitochondria and get even more ATP. So if we look at aerobic cellular respiration, okay, so that means oxygen is required. So two more sets of reactions which occur in the specialized structures within the cells. So we're looking at the mitochondria. So you have the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So we talked briefly about the electron transport chain with the photosynthesis. So both areas have it. The Krebs cycle is just another way of getting more ATP. So don't stress over those specifically. Just know that it's done up in the mitochondria. So basically what you're going to see the glucose that's broken down. So that's going from that 6-carbon glucose to the 2,3-carbon pyruvate. We're going to mix that with oxygen. And that's all going to go inside the mitochondria. And we're going to get ATP, so the energy, and then our byproducts of carbon dioxide and water that's coming out. What is the most important function of the mitochondria? So the main and most important function is converting chemical energy from glucose products into chemical energy of ATP. So taking those pyruvates, so those broken down parts of the glucose, and converting that to ATP. So without this, the cell would not get the energy that it needs to function. So there's a lot going on in this slide. Don't stress over it. What I want you to see is that here we have that glycolysis that we talked about. So here's where the glucose is broken down into the 2 pyruvates. That's going to give us 2 ATP there. Then as we come into the mitochondria, we can see there's a couple different cycles that go on here. The first one here is going to give us 2 more ATP, but it's this last part here that we're not going to get into a lot of details of that's going to give us a ton of ATP for the same amount of pyruvates going into it. So per glucose molecule that comes into the cell, we get about 36 to 38 ATP. So we get a lot out of that little nutrients. Alright, so here is just another example to kind of show you how everything is connected. So we have our chloroplast up here. We have the light energy that comes in, so that's going to start giving us those glucose molecules. We're going to take those glucose molecules, we're going to take them into the cells. We're going to break them down and send them into the mitochondria. We're going to get ATP out of the mitochondria. And then we're going to send our byproducts, that carbon dioxide and water, back into the environment, which then the plants are going to take up, and then we're going to get that glucose and oxygen back out of that one, and it's going to keep repeating. So remember earlier I asked you to look at what you found was similar or different between the cellular respiration equation and the photosynthesis equation. And if you looked at them, you can notice that they yield the reactants of one is the products of the other, so that you can actually make a full circle using them. So why do the cells in a cat need energy? So remember, without energy, the cell would not have the fuel needed to run their chemical equations or any of their functions. So without these chemical equations, the cell would not live, and therefore the cat would not live. Alright, in this lesson, there is a lab that you can find on page 104 in your student guidebook. It has you using paper towel instead of chromatography paper. So you might get a little bit different results, and you might not be able to see stuff as well as I think you could. So I will have these 2 clips in the PDF file and on my website, so that if you would like to view those to kind of see a little bit more of what you should be seeing when you do this lab, feel free to watch those. Alright, in your assignment, we have another study island pathway being assigned. So this is 3B, this is photosynthesis. So remember, you must complete at least 10 questions. To get 4 points, you need to get 75% on 1 set of 10. So I can and I will be removing the lower scores when I go to grade the pathways. So as long as you got 75% in 1 set of 10, you'll earn the blue ribbon and you'll get your full points for the assignment. Also make sure that you're completing this assessment in the OLS. So there's only 6 questions there, so make sure that you are working and mastering that. If you do have any questions, please look over the lesson in the OLS. If you still need help, make sure you contact your homeroom teacher, because remember, I'm going to be out on leave, so I might not be able to check my K-mail as often as I normally do, so please make sure that if you do K-mail me, it might be a while before you get a response, so please contact your homeroom teacher first. Thanks, guys.